what is domestic violence. It's misuse or poor use of something or someone. I'm sure there's probably a better definition for it, but some people have been victims of domestic violence all their life. And then they do one thing to finally say enough's enough, and then they get put into that situation where somebody is going to get hurt. And I see and have been through this all my life. All my life. I've seen people raise their fists and then turn around and say, well, it's because they're depressed. It's because of this. And when you hear this, when you hear people make these excuses or reasons for why it's okay to grab somebody, hit somebody, smack somebody, it sounds bad. It is bad. And it's the hypocrisy about domestic violence is everyone somehow gets caught up in it. And there's always somebody that's going to say, well, they don't really mean it. No, the problem about domestic violence is no one ever really means to be abusive, right? Well, the problem is that some people don't really look at it as domestic violence as a form of targeting or gang stalking. And we're finally getting better. We're starting to pay better attention to what gang stalking is or targeted individuals. Some people are targeted for domestic violence all their life. They spend their whole life surviving severe neglect, malnutrition, all these problems. They're sick all the time. They don't get to school and work. And after a while, they're just totally, they can't function. You cannot function around people like this for very long. And then at some point, like in our case right now, is that you decide at one point you're going to start talking about it until you get healed and recover from it. That's not to say that it doesn't happen, but the chances of getting stronger and better and wiser, the more we talk about domestic violence, how we may have participated in it, or maybe how some of us just endured. You endure it, you endure the mistreatment. I've heard everything from somebody saying, well, I gave you food and clothes. That's never, ever okay to abuse anybody. That's never okay, an excuse to just yell and scream and jump in somebody's face. These are things that I see and hear all the time. I mean, some of us, we surely will say things. After a while, you spend your whole time hearing things like, well, I went and did this for you. I went and did that for you. There's never a trade-off. There's never, ever a good trade-off to be attacked and attacked and attacked. And I hear how people recruit people, and that's what I meant by gang stalking. I'm going to tell you on and on about the cycle of abuse. It will not stop until people finally say, I have enough. I had enough of this. I had enough of living this way. I had enough of saying, yes, be the yes man for everything. And I realize that there are a lot of people, and this is why you can be stronger and wiser. But there's some people, they just have a tendency to just prey on somebody in a weak moment, and they get a sick thrill out of it. And I've seen both sides of it. The reason I talk about it is that you realize that, listen, I'm becoming just as bad as them. If I participate in this abuse, I'm just as bad as them. Then I'm going to be the same person. I'm cussing, and then I'm getting angry and yelling and screaming. And one of the tools I recognize that in all this is that it does not matter how much therapy you have. You get around people long enough that are like this, they'll use excuses to trap you, keep you in that same cycle, and then they say it's your fault, And what it comes down to domestic violence is recognizing as long as I participate in this, I'm part of the problem. And being part of the solution is saying, I'm no longer going to participate in an arguing with people. I'm not going to participate with people that are ganging up on people. I'm not, and you can see it happens at work, it happens at school, it happens at home, and it can happen for years. And there could be multiple abusers in your life, believe it or not. I love how people say, well, how is it that you're always an abused victim? I don't know necessarily that people want to be abuse victims, and to say that as somehow like they caused it, and this is where it's misleading. I was talking to a police officer about some things, and he said, they do. They find one person they target all their problems on, and then you have family recruiting people. I've seen my cousins do this. I've seen, relatives. I've seen and they're all guilty of it. And the thing is, they until they actually get pointed out for their behaviors and their actions, no one gets better. Nobody can change it. And I spent my whole life trying to find out, why is this such a mystery? Well, I didn't recognize after talking to domestic violence shelters that you can be abused by multiple people. I mean, I look at some of the stories now where people are like, gang raping and assaulting. It's the same with domestic violence. You can gang up on somebody. You can recruit family members. It could be relatives, foster parents. It could be anyone. It's no different than being, and it's on the same level as gang rape. I mean, they find their victim, they deprive them of the everyday things, and then after a while, they start to make them feel bad for even asking for a dinner or food, and then they're pushing them out the door, treating them like they're worthless, humiliating. I mean, these are all things that go on, and then they don't include them in conversations. They purpose, and I don't know if it's subconsciously excluding people, but it's one of the worst mean side of it's so mean spirited, and it can happen at church. It could be people that go to church. It could be anyone that does this. They gang up, they group up, they clicky, they find that, and they recruit each other. And these are the very people that some of us love and cared for. And then you watch their behavior ongoing. And they say, well, you always act like this and always act like again, it goes back to never taking personal responsibility. And they sit there and they go along with that behavior. And these are grown adults. So gang stalking, grouping up, and that's all part of the domestic violence cycle. And then they say, well, I bought you this, so therefore, I don't know anybody that I know that anyone that's ever been through something like that ever hears this from the people they care about. They think nothing about doing that for anyone else, but then they target you and they say, well, I did this for you and I did that for you. I'm telling you guys, and I'm telling you girls, it can happen to anybody. That's the worst part of it. It can happen for years. It could be multiple people. It could be, I've lived it. I'm like, you can have 20 people in your family that take turns. They all take turns at this person until they break this person down, break them down. And it all goes back to TI and gang stalking. It's one of the worst forms of, well, first of all, it never accomplishes anything. No one ever gets better. They don't ever improve as people. They don't grow. They just sit in their strange world and justify it and make sense of it. And all it comes down to is saying, do you want to participate in this lifestyle? And do you want to keep going the way you are? Because I'm telling you, after tonight, it was one horror show after another. And I have to tell you, there is a dark side of abuse, and it goes on for years. And it's like, man, I want this to be over. So we're shining a whole lot of light on it. According to the Bible, it's like shine as much light on this problem. And we're going to get to the bottom of this, because I'm going to say this and I'm going to keep saying it, that everyone I know that has lived this way or spent their whole life going from place to place, surviving it, and then finally get back on your feet only for them to come back and, haunt you with all the old memories and just stir the whole problems up. Listen, some people, they've been so traumatized by abuse that they don't even mean to bring up stuff. They're just so upset. And I see these people that just capitalize on it, and then they tear this person up to the point where it's like they can never ever learn from their mistakes. I mean, how many of you have ever lived in a home where you're never allowed to make mistakes? I mean, how do you ever grow as a person if you don't learn from your own mistakes? And the problem is that the dysfunction, the unhealthy lifestyle, and all the things that come with being an abuse victim for years, it all catches up with people. And then these people ask themselves, well, why haven't I really lived my life? Because you spend your whole life surviving it and trying to recover. And after a while, it just wears down on you. It wears down. I was sitting there, I was so tired and sick tonight, only to have to go through this over and over again. It's really easy for somebody to make excuses for why they do what they do, but the idea that somebody would ambush or get up, try and feel good about it, that there's nothing good about wanting to sit there and have to go through this, and then somebody grab my arm or push me around or get forceful or aggressive or harsh or critical. This is all part of that. And you could go to church every Sunday. You're not cured of it. That's the problem. And one of the things I recognize is, like, I spend my whole life trying to do better with my life. I spend my whole life wanting to achieve better, and this is what I have to settle for. And I don't want to associate with anyone. I don't want to be around this anymore. It's like I realized tonight was a significant night, because I'm like, I'm either going to become like them and participate in it, or I'm going to walk away and start making changes. Tonight was that night for me. I recognize that I can't be embarrassed anymore by this behavior, or I'm becoming just as bad, if not worse. And that's the biggest thing. That was my big wake-up call tonight. Is that once you grab me, I realize you've crossed the line. People say things, and I'm gonna be the first one that some things you just don't want to utter out of your mouth. And I really didn't think about that. And I was thinking about all these things that people are going throughout their day, and I'm thinking there are a couple things about this I despise about abuse, because eventually it just festers and it brews and it's just about it's just ripe. These problems start to get ripe. People start to react. They say things, and they start make these mean jokes, and these mean jokes. At what cost? At the cost of humiliating somebody? Because I'm going to tell you, being on one side of this mean jokes, I realize that there are a lot of things we've done that actually kind of create a different situation. And you're either going to talk about it and move on and work it out and realize that I hope these things in me change, because if I don't change this way of life, it'll just keep going on. And it is so true. Once you recognize, like, is it going to keep going on? Not if I don't talk about it. Not if I start exposing it for what it is. I am so disgusted that this has gone on all my life. I'm so disgusted to live this way, to have gone without, to not have the important necessities, only to be told as if it's like a rite of passage for somebody to help somebody. It's nothing for somebody to go out and get groceries and help somebody and do something for somebody. But when they target an abuse victim, they make them feel like they owe them something. And I'm going to say this to you guys. You should never, ever hold those things over somebody's head. I have learned this over and over again. I've seen people hide food, do all kinds of little mean jokes, play mean jokes. And it's all, again, part of that sick cycle. Some people, they feel like it's okay because it's my home. Therefore, I'm going to tell you this scripture, or some of these scriptures in this quote. Just because somebody, pays mortgages and rent to their home does not give them the right to be abusive towards somebody. Or even, listen, there's a nice way to kindly ask somebody, like, listen, you and I aren't right for each other, so we're just gonna end it. And I'm telling you, that doesn't always work out really well either, because some people, they can't handle rejection. All these things happen, okay? And I look at these people that do this, I look at the way people handle themselves, and some of them, they don't have it coming. Some of them, they don't even see it coming, but they know that there's been problems in the past. And that's one of the indicators. I look at some of the things that have been going on in my life recently, and a lot of times you have to egg it on and create this monstrosity, and it just starts to blow up. And that's one of the things I recognize with my sister and I. You can't even ask somebody a question without them, getting temperamental, acting out, lunging at you, taking their fists back, threatening to hurt you. The idea that anyone would ever threaten to hurt somebody, and then they go and recruit more friends, and then they isolate the victim more. Those days are over, because I'm going to say this. The more we talk about it, the more we recognize that one of us have played that role. And that's really how it is that always people playing out the same roles. I realize what a horror story it is to live this way, to neglect the needs of the family, to neglect the people around you, and then just only emphasize on these people. That's how abusive families are to one another. They'll say, okay, well, I did that for you, therefore, you owe me something in return. It's always like this. It's like they're switch hitting. And then there's people like this, they don't feel good about themselves unless they make somebody feel bad. And, then they, pick little stupid jokes and pick, and look for ways, and they agitate it and they create a monstrosity. I've spent my whole life watching people act and behave like this. And they say, well, you know what, if you didn't do this, I wouldn't have acted the way. This is why people have to grow up and become mature. And I look at the family and the friends around me who have spent their whole lives doing this to people. It's like, why do you spend your whole time looking for ways to get back at them? Why can't you just let it go? But no, that's not the situation we find ourselves in. So here's some examples of how to change it. You recognize that you played a role in it. And I said, listen, I played a role in it and I was wrong. I got to change this about my life because I don't want to keep repeating this cycle of abuse. The abusers and the users and the cheaters and the slanderers and scammers, they're always going to be like that unless they recognize that they play a role in it. It's always easy to put it off on somebody else and take the focus off of somebody else. I've heard people say, well, they're on medication, so that gives them a reason. And they target people. It's gang stalking and it's targeting. We really recognize that domestic violence, it has a couple different faces too. It's not just one thing. It's a bunch of things. And I sit here and spend all this time to say, again, abuse, domestic violence, whatever you call it right now, it's a misuse of something or someone. And there are people that it's like they don't feel good unless they make somebody feel bad. And I am sorry that we had to live this way. I'm sorry that I didn't recognize how the danger signs. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm just as much responsible for this as not. And until I change it, it's going to keep happening. And I talked to counselors tonight and I talked to police and I thought to myself, this is why it's going to change, because at some point you have to say no more. You have to say enough's enough. I'm tired of living this way. I've spent too much of my life trying to make something in my life and this is holding me back. I am tired of being hurt. I'm tired of going through this over and over.